what I loved about it was that I was able to perform. I loved being in plays at school, and I always loved being the class clown and loved having fun. So I loved that I got paid to do things that I really wanted to do. That's really where my whole philosophy now comes from, the idea that you could actually get paid to do the things you want to do. And that's really what Spot On was all about. People would write in and say, we want to see the presenters jump out of a plane. Oh, okay. And then they paid us. I mean, what was better than that? Of course, in America, the show would be called That's Incredible, which it was. But in New Zealand, we just say, oh, yeah, that's fairly interesting. That show was a real pivotal point for me in terms of understanding how to tell a story and not just be a face on television. And where I was able to use the skills that I had learned as a camera operator and really hone my skills in terms of just telling a story. At the end of the day, television is just about moments. And the way you create moments are through stories. And I learned a lot, particularly from Mac Leishman, who was, at least 10 years older than me, I don't want to say specifically, but he really taught me a lot as well. I liked his on-camera presence, and he was also very generous with taking time to help me, because it was a big leap to suddenly be up there in Auckland producing my own pieces. That's where I met Irene Gardner, another person who's had a real influence on my career. And that was a whole different thing again, because unlike shooting and trying to make sure that you get all the shots when you're in the field, this was live television. And it was my first try at live TV. Milli Vanilli would not sit down on the couch until just before the interview started. And I couldn't work out why. And it was because they didn't want to damage the crease in their pants. They didn't want to ruin that crease. When they did sit down, we're live on TV, and it was Rob and Fabrice. You remember, this is before they got busted. Girl You Know It's True was like #1. I think that's what the one they won their Grammy for. And Fabrice is sitting there twirling his dreadlock, and the dreadlock became detached from his head while we were live on the air. And I wish I could find that footage, because his head is here, but there's a gap, and the dreadlock is on his finger. And then when he finally stopped twirling it, pulled it down, he realized he had a dreadlock in his hand. After I'd finished presenting 345 Live at the end of that year, I got a call about doing a small part on Gloss, and ended up doing a number of scenes with Kevin Smith. I think we got in a few fights, actually. I was a spoilt brat of a 21-year-old who basically was just misbehaving. It was fun. Doing Gloss was actually an easier transition for me than presenting, because I had done a lot of acting at school. So I just relied on my experience, I guess, from doing theater sports and from learning lines and being in plays. So that was actually easier. Around 2000, I got a call that there was this new show coming up called Survivor, and they were looking for a host who was used to shooting on location, traveling around the world. So I'd been recommended for the job. I went in, I interviewed with Mac Burnett and met with the network. And anyway, long story short, I got cut down to just myself and Jeff Probst. And when I went into the final meeting with Les Moonves, who ran the network, he said, we've got a problem with your New Zealand accent. I don't know what accent I have now, but anyway, he wasn't keen on having a foreign accent, and it was a bit of an issue. And in the end, Jeff got the job. I didn't get the job, but I do know that it was just the two of us. So then Amazing Race came up, and once again I was shortlisted for the job. I was down to 3, then I was down to 2, then I went into a meeting, and then my nationality came up again, and my accent, and I was like, so they said, do you think you can Americanize your accent to get the job? I said, sure. Now it seems so funny, because now you've got that girl who does So You Think You Can Dance? So You Think You Can Dance. And they've got Simon Cowell and Nigel Lithgow and all these foreign accents on television. But in 2001, there were no foreign accents on American television. So I had to Americanize my accent to get the job, which I did, which I've done. And now if I had a New Zealand accent, it would actually, in a way, be a better accent for the show. Now it would be perfect. But back then, being a New Zealander on network television in America just wasn't done. And to the best of my knowledge, I'm the first so-called foreign host on a network television show in America. I could be wrong, but I think I might be. Amazing Race pushes people to do things that they never imagined themselves doing. There are people that have never traveled, never owned a passport, never been outside the United States, obviously. So for them to suddenly find themselves in Tunisia or some foreign land and be exposed to that culture, to me, it's a wonderful thing. And on Amazing Race, we actually celebrate good things that are happening in different countries around the world. And that's in prime time television. And so for Americans to see that, I think has been a real eye-opener. Because they can see that just because somebody has a turban or because they're from a different religion or a different culture doesn't mean that they're a terrorist or that they're out to get Americans. We make a show that isn't a vindictive show. It's not about somebody being voted off or somebody doing something nasty against somebody else. At the end of the day, it really is a celebration of all the good things that the world has to offer, and we put a race inside that concept, if you like, and I get to see people do things that I know they never imagined themselves doing. Making No Opportunity Wasted, or Now for short, was just hugely important for me because I wanted to make another piece of television that was positive, that really accentuated something positive. On a commercial level, that's incredibly difficult to do. I mean, I really can only think of one other show that has been a success that is ultimately a really feel-good show, and that would probably be Extreme Home Makeover. But any other feel-good show in network television or at the high-end commercial level is very, very difficult to make. And we knew that going in with No Opportunity Wasted. That said, you know, we were able to make the show in the United States. We made it here in New Zealand. We also made it in Canada. But ultimately, I think the concept is flawed because there aren't people fighting and people being voted off and people being eliminated. And so I think it makes it very difficult on a commercial level. But it did have an influence on people. And I think the mindset of No Opportunity Wasted has worked much better in book form and also with the motivational speeches that I do. The ride is probably the most rewarding piece of entertainment that I've ever made. First of all, it was made of this smell of an oily rag. It was essentially in the field just me and a cameraman. One of my best friends, Scott Shelley, he has a master's in film. I met him when I first went to New York, and he worked for Louise and I on a project for nothing, and I knew we'd be friends for life. He sat on a motorbike backwards from Los Angeles to New York, and that's got to be a good friend, right? What was great about the ride was that we had absolutely no expectations to do anything other than just make a documentary and let it land wherever it landed. Thankfully, the president of the Motion Picture Academy, Tom Sherrick, saw the film and called me up. I thought it was a joke. I thought it was a friend of mine playing a joke, and said, "Would you like to take this into theaters?" And through him, he set it up that we ended up going to 20 cities across the United States and selling out in all theaters. And we gave all the money from the box office to MS. And we were working towards a lifelong goal of mine to raise $1 million for a charity. So $500,000 was raised during the ride. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were raised from the box office. And then we had an opportunity to have the film screen on Showtime. They decided to license the film. And with that licensing fee, that took us to $1 million. So just recently, 3 years after I did the ride, this little ride that could, that was really made for nothing, hit $1 million max. So I'm certainly very proud of that. It was a real team effort with my wife and Scott the shooter, Jess Bushyhead the editor. But it was going back to basics, just all of us pitching in and doing everything. I did the sound Foley in my underwear in the garage, and my daughter asked me what I was doing. It was really handmade.